Hi everyone, this is Sam Black, and as a subscription goal on my stream, once again, I've offered to do a 17 lands informed set review where I'm going to look at the stats here on 17 lands as a way to organize cards to discuss in the context of their stats and to explain why I think the stats are the way they are, what those mean, where you should use them, stuff like that. So I did this before. Some of you may be familiar with this process. I did it for Crimson Vow, this is Crimson Vow. I did it for Midnight Hunt as well. But let's get into it for Crimson Vow, starting with white commons. So the highest performing white common by an amount that has been increasing over the last few days, Traveling Minister. I would say, as someone who's been following 17 lands for the past several sets, seeing white one-drops overperform should not be a shock. This card does a lot of things. This is one that I read some tweets about before the set started where people were like, this thing might actually be good in some decks. And I'm like, well, it's good with the black-white stuff. It's good with the training stuff. It's good with red-white because red-white's also the training stuff. It's good with blue because blue seems to be racing with flyers. So it looks like it's good with every color. Healer's Hawk was kind of strong. This seems better because it's not just a 1/1 lifelink. It's like it both does a damage and gains a life if you have a way to connect. But it also makes it more likely that you can connect because, like, if your opponent has a 3/3 and you have a 2/2, you use Traveling Minister, and now your 2/2 can attack where it wouldn't be able to otherwise, and your opponent doesn't want to block because now they're trading down. And so Traveling Minister just like lets you push a bunch of damage that you wouldn't otherwise be able to push that makes it a lot stronger than just like a 1/1 lifelink would be. And then also, if you don't have any attacks available, where a 1/1 lifelinker wouldn't be able to do anything, this can still just tap to gain life without ever entering combat. So basically just like powerful baseline card with a bunch of special utility in set, and great way to enable the life gain stuff in black. All the stuff I already talked about. So as I already mentioned, I think that it's good in every archetype. We can check real quick to see its win rate by color pairs. Amusingly, it's behind Nurturing Presence barely when paired with blue, because Nurturing Presence has synergy with enchantments. But I think that it's more of what's happening there is that you get Nurturing Presence a little bit later, and I think that right now I think you have to be like kind of like in the know to realize you should even be putting Nurturing Presence in your blue-white decks, which gives you a bit of an edge. I don't think Nurturing Presence is actually better than Traveling Minister in blue-white, but I do think it's like kind of close. And then best in white-black, best in white-red, and then a little bit behind Sigarda's in Prison minting green-white. But, you know, best or second best common in every color combination. So I think you want to take it highest overall. And like, I think where we're seeing, like, if you sort by average taken, it's pretty far down right now. There are 7 cards that people are taking over it. Now, when a card is taken late and wins, you have to remember that part of why it's winning is the fact that it's taken late, right? Like the people who have it have on average spent seventh picks, or yes, they've spent 7th picks for it, and so they have the benefit of having taken better cards or other good cards with their earlier picks. Whereas, if you have to spend a higher pick, you're like down a fraction of a card quality resource or whatever, theoretically. But here, I think, it's like 0.8% ahead of the second best card. I think it's just actually, if you're not thinking about tabling stuff and everything, it is just the strongest white common in a vacuum. I do think there are a lot of decks that want Fierce Retribution over it specifically. I could see myself sometimes taking Fierce Retribution over Traveling Minister in a white deck, like, third or fourth pick or whatever, depending on what I have already, whether my deck is more aggressive or more controlling, what colors I'm in and stuff. But um, basically, people are not taking Traveling Minister high enough. If you're drafting white, you should be taking it over most or all other commons most or all of the time. How far along are we? The first card. Sorry, I'm mostly going to be ignoring chat. Next up, Fierce Retribution. This is obviously better when you're defensive, but it's really nice that you can spend the extra mana to kill anything. It's not the removal spell you're looking for an aggro deck, unless that aggro deck is like blue-white evasion. Like if you're evasive, people are going to be attacking back. And while you might be aggressive, you're an aggressive deck that's getting attacked. And so you're going to have a good opportunity to use Retribution for 2 mana. If you're like red-white, aggro, green-white, this isn't going to help you with your ability to attack and get your training stuff going, and you'd probably prefer more synergistic cards and maybe even just like trying to use a combat trick as a way to get through a blocker instead of trying to use a removal spell as a way to get through a blocker. But if you are being attacked, generally, all else equal, this card is great in blue, white, and black, white, not so good if you're green or red. Though there are definitely exceptions to that, especially with green. You might be like a multicolor green deck that's more controlling. The more bombs you have, expensive bombs, the more interested in Fierce Retribution you are. Good card, much more deck dependent than Traveling Minister. Some decks want it, some decks don't. Sigarda's Imprisonment. This card has a very, very, very close overall game and hand win rate to Fierce Retribution, and it's more general use. Regardless of whether you're attacking or blocking, whether you're an aggressive deck or a controlling deck, this is going to answer a creature for 3 mana. What that means is, given that we know that they perform similarly overall, the decks that are being attacked would prefer to have Fierce Retribution, and the decks that are attacking would prefer to have Sigarda's Imprisonment. Because we know that actually Fierce Retribution is going to win more than 56.3% of the time sometimes and less other times, whereas the gap in win rate in Sigarda's Imprisonment is going to vary less. So the numbers plus a bit of reasoning, without even checking, I'm going to be very confident that if it's going to be great when I'm wrong here, look at green or white red's win rate, the Imprisonment's going to be higher than Retribution. And love it. I am wrong about that. Imprisonment, 54.9, Retribution higher. So that has to be accounted for somewhere else. So is it green-white? Green-white, we already saw. This is the highest. It's a reasonable amount, not a full percent, but you go to amount higher. Is it just all green-white where that's favored? Let's see. White-black, Retribution, significantly over Imprisonment. I wonder. And then here, again, Retribution a little over. Oh, they're basically tied in blue-white, which I wouldn't have expected could potentially be due to enchantment synergies. Also, could be any number of factors from variance to people drafting it differently than I expect or whatever. Regardless, I still believe, despite whatever was going on with that red-white stat, that the more aggressive you are, the more you should be preferring Imprisonment over Retribution. The more you plan to be attacked, the more you should be preferring Retribution over Imprisonment. Both are comparable overall. So obviously early in the draft, it's mostly going to depend on where you would like to be. Are you a player who prefers to be aggressive or prefers to be controlling? Next up, Kindly Ancestor, 2/3 lifelink. Found this card to be very good. Lifelink overperforms every set. Just to say, people just never get around to giving Lifelink enough credit. Turns out, limited decks end up racing each other a lot. So even if you're aggressive, it still ends up having value. If you're controlling and playing against an aggressive, basically anytime your opponent is aggressive, Lifelink is fantastic. If they are not aggressive, Lifelink isn't useless, but it's not so good. And 2/3 lifelink by itself is solid. Like 2/3 is not exciting, but lifelink is a very good ability. 2/3 with an ability is playable. I would expect 2/3 lifelink to be okay. The backside of this being able to give something else lifelink means that you just gain appreciably more life off of it, and especially when paired with blue, it's very easy to generate Baneslayers, which is to say any sort of large flying lifelink creature. And anytime you can have an uncontested flying lifelink creature, that's extremely hard to race, and you can often just ignore your opponent's creatures while attacking in the air and trading damage, but gaining enough life that you easily win the race and just beat whatever they're doing without paying any attention to what it is. And then obviously this also has synergies with black because of the life gain matters stuff. Not surprising to see the two life gain creatures best performing overall. Next up, love to see it, Nurturing Presence. You'll note this has been played a very small fraction as much as the other colors, or the other cards around it. And it's been taken much later. And this is one that I think reads really bad. We are used to 2-mana auras that don't permanently pump something not being any good. It's easy to think of the card from the previous set that gave something the Unruly Mob ability. The bonus 1/1 Flying Spirit is a really big deal here. It's like this is so a 2-mana 1/1 flyer is a bad rate. A 2-mana 2/1 flyer is a good rate. And this gives you a 1/1 flyer and also pushes extra damage. And you get some of that damage right away. And then there are also enchantment synergies with the fact that this is triggering Braincomber and stuff like that. Also, subtly, it's making a creature bigger, which can allow you to trigger training where you might otherwise not be able to. So I think that it is correct to continue to see this card less played than cards around it, because I think it's only good in some archetypes. I think like white-black rarely wants it. I think that white-blue usually wants it very much, as many as it can get, basically. And I think it's also pretty good in white-red. Just it's a reasonably strong aggressive card. And then it's going to be hit or miss in green-white, really depending on what your creatures are, how much training you have, how much you need the pump to do your training. Yeah. So this card, like, I don't think you should take it as high as the cards around it if you're not blue-white. I think a lot of its strength comes from blue-white. Also, I expect you to continue to be able to table it for at least another week or so. So even when you are blue-white, there's something to be said for saying, oh, I want this. I'm going to send it around and get it later. Chat's pointing out you can play this on your opponent's creature. So if you don't have a creature and you want a 1/1, you can do that. Amusingly, if you do have to put it on your opponent's creature to get the 1/1, their creature will get bigger when you play, or no, it gives the ability to the enchanted creature. So it pumps when they play a creature, not when you play a creature. So it is risky to have to do that. But if you want a 1/1 and you have a removal spell or something in a desperate situation, you can play this on your opponent's creature. I've never had to do it. I would certainly try to avoid doing it most of the time. So underrated card that is strong, but I think that you can get it late and should often try to table it. Heron of Hope. This is pretty strong. Another evasive life gain card. 2/3, 4 mana, 2/3 flyer. If you would gain life, gain that much life +1, and then for 3 mana you can give it lifelink until end of turn. It's kind of a life gain lord, like the more from that second line that makes it play well with a traveling minister in particular, but also anything else that gains life. Good with glutton, the whatever the 1/4 black make a gluttonous guest, I think. They make a blood and then you gain life whenever you sack blood. I mentioned that if you can get Kindly Ancestor on a flying creature, you can use turn anything into a Baneslayer Angel to win races limited. Heron of Hope does a reasonable job of that by itself. You don't, there are plenty of times when this doesn't have lifelink, but white decks want a pretty low curve in this format, basically across the board, I think. So usually not long after you've played it, it's basically, you're not doing anything else with the mana and can give it lifelink. White's also not great at having mana sinks, which makes it pretty easy to use this. And I think it matches up reasonably well against other creatures with flying in this set. Obviously, like the black common flyer is a 2/2, which this matches up well against. And then like the big blue flyer is a 2/5 and not very good. And this bounces off of that in a way that's profitable for you. Like if you just have those two creatures, you can attack, gain 3 life, hang out. So there are not a lot of, I don't think there, I guess there's the white 3/3 flyer that kind of dominates it, but for the most part, it performs pretty well in aerial combat, and the life gain is a reasonably big deal. I am surprised that it performs better overall than Drogskull Infantry. Before playing with the set, my guess was that Drogskull Infantry was going to be the best common creature. Obviously, we're seeing it significantly down from that. Giving +2/+2 is nice, but it's fairly expensive, and I guess the 2/2 on the front side has maybe been hard to get a lot of value out of. I'm not sure exactly what's going on here. I do think the card is strong, and I've personally had good experiences with it. I think that it's not super hard for it to trade off, and then for you to the +2/2 is very nice. It does line up poorly against, if your goal is to trade off with it, it doesn't do that well against the green 2-drops, where there's the 2/2 that is a 2/4 on your turn that can easily attack past this, and then there's the 2/2 that gets +1/+1 when you play a human and often attacks as a 3/3. Infantry can't block and trade with either of those. And then it also can't block and trade with the 2/1 red creature that gets first strike when attacking. So it might just be that it's like it wants to be able to block other 2-drops and then generate value, and it doesn't line up very well against very many different creatures in that role. But I've still been happy with this in blue-white in particular, which is most of where I've played this, and I wouldn't be sad to have it anywhere I'm looking for a 2-drop, basically. Heron Blessed Geist. This is A little expensive for what most white decks are looking for, but it's also, reasonably powerful. I don't think it's a bad rate. 3/3 flyer is pretty big. It does, I guess, when I was talking about Heron of Hope's matchups, I forgot to mention that Heron of Hope does have a really bad matchup against the blue 4-mana 3/3 flyer. But Heron Blastgeist being more expensive than that, significant drawback. This card is more fine than good or bad. I don't think it's the end of the world if you have to play it anywhere, but it's, this is comparable to the Griff that in Midnight Hunt, where there you're getting an extra toughness and getting an ETB instead of this potential ability to make 2 more spirits. Making 2 more spirits sounds really good, but you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get there. This has to die, not get exiled. You have to spend a bunch of mana. You have to have an enchantment. And then you get to 1/1 spirits, which is very good, but at that point, we're pretty late in the game. They may or may not matter. So when you compare that to just having extra toughness up front, as well as an ETB ability, hard to say which one's better or worse. Obviously, not the best comparison to compare cards cross format, but as far as, like, if this card seems very good or very bad to you, and you agree that the Griff was medium, it should be easy to see that this is also, okay, that's roughly medium power level. As for like, how much should you be trying to get value out of like getting this in your graveyard without casting it so that you can spend 4 mana and get 2 tokens as like free value? I would say, I guess it's kind of nice if it comes up, but white isn't super well positioned to like make that happen in a way that's meaningfully profitable. Like you can try to do it with like, oh, I'm gonna pair this with blood tokens and discard it, but like you aren't usually using a blood token until reasonably late in the game, and you would generally rather try to find the land to cast this than discard it, and like try to get the value that way. So technically there are ways that can happen, but I think they're pretty fringe and I wouldn't put a lot of stock in them. Griff Rider. This is one, I would say training across the board has been a little bit weaker than I expected. It's just not that easy to set up a situation where you can afford to attack with the small guy that needs training and a big guy to train it. So like this has evasion, so it can attack while it's small, but you still need another thing that has more power than it and can attack. And so if they have like a large ground guy, that might stop you from being able to train this thing. And when you can't train it, you have a 2/1 flyer for 3, which is very bad. This is very good if you get to train on it immediately, very bad if you don't get to train on it. Awesome if you get to train on it multiple times reasonably quickly. All of that, I think, really in practice, you rarely get to attack with this for 3 on turn 4. And so if you get to train on it, but you have to wait a little while, then it's, again, more medium, doesn't block well right away, potentially has pretty bad matchups against like Lantern Bearer. So more awkward than it looks, kind of fillery. Adamant Will, when you want a trick, it's a trick. We've seen this card before, and cards like it are in basically every set. Worth noting, stats-wise, usually there's some white trick that no one plays, no one takes, and it has incredible stats. And that isn't true in this set. I think said white trick basically always costs a single white mana, and there just isn't a white trick for 1 mana. There's a removal spell, Piercing Light, instead. And it looks like Piercing Light is actually, somewhat surprisingly, depending on your priors, worse than like most 1 mana white tricks would be. So, yeah. This is to say, if you are used to not playing tricks in your white decks, there's no hidden value in this set to gain by playing the 1 mana white trick, because there's not a 1 mana white trick you can play. Parish Blade Trainee, all the same problems that Griff Rider has with training just not being quite as good as you want it to be. This card is absolutely awful if you can't train on it. Fine if you can train once. Good if it really gets going, but it's hard to really get this going. I was like, this is a card that I overrated my first draft or whatever. I had 3 of them and very rarely put a counter on it, and then saw that it hadn't been doing well, and now I basically just off it. Piercing Light, killing an early attacker and scrying sounds pretty sweet. In practice, I think this is too narrow. The format is not as much. So the most important thing in the format is bombs. There are tons of them. They are great. You need to be able to answer them. That means you need to prioritize removal spells that can answer them. Piercing Light doesn't answer them. So it's kind of occupying a removal slot in your deck, but not doing what you need your removal slots to do. And it has a good place in the format because the fact that bombs are so important pushes people to try to be very aggressive to end a game before a bomb wins. But that doesn't always involve being aggressive in a way that Piercing Light lines up well against. I mentioned how Kindly Ancestor matches up poorly against the aggressive green 2-drops. Piercing Light does also. And some of your opponents, instead of trying to go under bombs, just have their own bombs. And then Piercing Light is horrible. So I think this is a pretty solid sideboard card for the bomb decks against the aggro decks, but it's a pretty weak main deck card because it's just it has some good matchups and it does some sweet stuff. Scry 1, trade with a guy for 1 mana is very strong, but too often you're just not going to get to do that at a reasonable time. Nebelgast Regiler doesn't read very strong. You don't really want to use your 5 mana creature to tap their creature. Doesn't play very well, isn't very strong. Okay, great. Vampire Slayer, if Drug Skull Infantry underperformed, I would expect this to be quite a bit worse. It is. Not much to see here. If you really need just a 2-drop human that sometimes attacks better than a 2/2 or blocks better than 2/2 or whatever, it's here for you, but it reads as roughly a 2-mana 2/2, and it is that. Militia Rallier. It's nice that this can block by itself, but for anyone who's been playing a long time, you've probably played with Mog Flunkies, and you know that they definitely don't work all the time, and this one doesn't work all the time. You really want to be able to attack with your aggressive creatures when you want to attack with your aggressive creatures. And then, the thing that this aspires to do is work well with training creatures because it has a relatively high amount of power for its cost. But given that all of the training creatures are underperforming and not as good as you want, the enabler for your training creatures is also not going to be great. Speaking of, Estwald Shield Basher has performed shockingly poorly. I guess there's kind of a pun there with the fact that there is a common shock that is very good in this format and kills this at tremendous value to the person who spent 1 mana to answer your 4-drop. But this card reads pretty strong to me because it is so good at attacking, and it does play really well with training. But again, if training isn't good, the things that enable training aren't good. And while this attacks well, it blocks horribly, and it doesn't match up well against removal spells. So this card can sometimes be a problem if you're trying to play a defensive deck and get paired against it, but it's a little too plays one way to have a lot of success in the format, I would assume, based on its results. Though I will say this is a card that I did overestimate relative to its stats, which, when I read it, I thought there would be a place for it. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is a place for it. If you know that you're going to be the aggressor, if you are using training and you know that it's correct for you to use training despite properly rating training, which is to say knowing that it's not very strong, then you might, as long as you've taken all that into account, there might be some decks to put it in. But for the most part, the numbers say that it doesn't match. It doesn't line up well in the format. It's just a lot of mana, dies to removal, and only plays one way. Unholy Efficient doesn't read very strong, doesn't play very strong. I thought it might have a chance in terms of being a good body to put auras onto, but it's just too. Vigilance isn't really the keyword you're looking for in those decks, and it's just too low impact. Supernatural Rescue, there's not a lot to say about this card. It just costs a lot of mana. It does some stuff that looks like, okay, I could maybe see this doing some stuff, but like it's also just such a weird package where like you want to give your thing +1/+2 while it's in combat, but you want to tap your opponent's creatures before combat. And so while maybe if you add up all the parts of this, it can combine to almost be worth 4 mana, you never get all the parts. This is secretly a modal spell, and neither of the modes is really worth anywhere near 4 mana. And then we have Sanctify, which is clearly a sideboard card, if anything. There aren't enough valuable artifacts and enchantments that you want to play this main. Sorcery speed disenchant is a lot worse than sorcery speed removal of any kind is a lot worse than instant speed. This is just not very good. Moving on to uncommons. All right, best performing Angelic Quartermaster. This is 5/5 flying. This is 5/5 worth of stats. 3/3 of it has flying. 2/2 of it basically potentially has haste. Unlike Gavany Silversmith, both of these counters have to go on creatures that aren't this, which is worth noting. But the good version of this is just a lot of stats for its mana unlimited, and the bad version of this is fine. And the great version of this, you're putting those counters on things that have keywords and don't have summoning sickness. You're getting both counters. The counters are like particularly valuable. And you can even trigger stuff by putting counters on things in the set sometimes. You could even this can make a thing bigger that allows you to train on another creature, so you kind of generate a third counter out of the deal. Anyway, strong card. Valorous Stance, this is a good card. 2 mana to kill a creature with 4 toughness or more is just a better rate than we often see on that kind of effect. I would expect to spend 3 mana for that on most commons, and most of the commons where I'd expect to spend 3 mana on it, I would also expect that it's dead sometimes. But with this, if my opponent doesn't have a 4 toughness creature, I can probably find some time to buy out saving my own creature with it. And then in this format that's so about bombs, this is a great way to play a card that can answer most bombs. So really, really strong. Great card. This is often anytime I see this in a pack, it's one of the cards I'm pulling to the front mentally or in paper or in practice if I see it as, well, this is a consideration. Happy to take it early. Circle of Confinement. Silk Wrap type cards are generally pretty good. This is, restricted to mana value 3 or less, but mana value 3 or less is very likely to get your opponent's, first play or first significant play. Obviously, not being able to hit bigger things matters, but this is solid removal. I'm surprised, honestly, that it's this close to Valor's Stance. I do think Valor's Stance is appreciably better. This is more what you need in like a control deck that's looking to not die early, or really just if you are either looking to stay alive early or looking to attack, this is pretty good. I don't know. Resistance Squad, a little bit narrow in terms of you want to make sure you have enough humans to trigger this, though there are plenty of humans, and this thing is obviously fantastic if you have a human. Twin Blade Geist, Double Strike is strong. This card is very good to put other things on or put on other things. The first side of it is basically just, a 2-drop that trades. And then the back side is very scary. I think that this probably underperforms some pie in the sky view of its power level. Your opponent does get to see it coming and does know when they kill it that they're giving you the ability to use the backside, and they can go out of their way to not kill the front if they're not ready to deal with the back and stuff. So your opponent's often going to be prepared to deal with this. But it's still, the fact that they can deal with it doesn't necessarily mean that it's effortless to do so. It's going to drain their resources in some way. Solid 2-drop. Fleeting Spirit. This is a weird card in terms of figuring out how close to its hypothetical ceiling it is. The discard a card to dodge removal spells, or to exile and come back, is very good if your opponent's trying to if you are attacking with this and your opponent wanted to use a removal spell on your creature that is pressuring them. This card is very good against that. That will not be an effective strategy. If you're trying to attack with this and your opponent plays literally any creature, you are often not going to get to the point where you can use First Strike early in the game, and so it will fail to be the aggressive creature that you wanted it to be. This is a card that would play better in Constructed than in Limited, except I don't know that it's actually strong enough for any Constructed deck. But just structurally, the idea that in Constructed, it's more likely that your opponent's trying to use removal spells to answer your white-whiny creatures, whereas in Limited, it's more likely that someone's just trying to block your 2-drop and they're not really looking to use a removal spell. Means that the discard a card ability is relatively weak in Limited, where blocking is more likely. That said, the get first strike ability is more likely to be strong, but it doesn't happen early, and 3 cards is fairly expensive. So I haven't found this thing to function as much like a 3/1 first striker as it wants to. Basically, this is a lot worse than just Porcelain Legionnaire, a 3/1 first striker would be. And so, yeah, this is no Adanto Vanguard or whatever. Distracting Geist. Territorial Hammer Skull was very, very, very strong. That was this cost for a 2/3 that when it attacked tapped something in Ixalan, and it didn't have the disturb part. That was very good in a format where it was basically the only common that had any text, while it was in play, and it also had 2 extra toughness. The 2 extra toughness is really big. It allows it to play defense, and it makes it much easier to tap your opponent's creature that has power, and then their small creature can't just block and trade with it. Whereas it's very, very easy to, when playing against Distracting Geist, leave, just like 2/1/1s back, and then they tap one of them, and the other gets to trade with the Distracting Geist. And then you get the backside, but the backside is just so expensive that I have not found this particularly threatening when playing against it, and it doesn't have very good stats. Griffling Cavalry. This is, it looks like training just across the board was kind of a miss. Like it's all of the cards that have or enable training underperform. So it's just overcosted relative to how strong the ability is. This card is very much about training, and this splashy uncommon plays worse than the common version. Not exactly version, but the common 4-mana flyer. Dawnheartgeist. I have drafted like blue-white, have tons of spirits, therefore I'm casting a bunch of enchantments. I'm kind of defensive, so gaining life would be good. And still, this card just felt too low impact. Like, you have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get it to do a thing, and then the thing it does just isn't good enough. It's like narrow and not worth it in the narrow spot, so basically worthless. Maybe it's better with black than it is with blue if you're like desperate for life gain triggers, but I think this card is disappointing to bad depending on what you were hoping for or expecting. Owenbach Escort. This is a victim of the training situation where like training is bad, all the enablers, all the payoffs, everything that has anything to do with +1/+1 counters is also bad. Also, even if training was good, I don't know if this card would be any good. This wants like there to be just like an actual natural +1/+1 counter theme where you have creatures that just enter the battlefield with +1/+1 counters, and this can regularly target most of your creatures in like the right archetype, and this is just not that set. This is a Vigilance 1/1. It is a worse version of the Vigilance 1/2 common. Arm the Cathars. Again, this card. Well, first of all, it's just like sorcery speed pump spells need to have a lot to get there. And if this had a chance, it would be to enable training. Training not good. Training enabler not good. This card not good. Radiant Grace. The sides of this card do not do enough. This card is just too low impact across the board. Bride's Gown. This is a lot of, you have to, this is the fancy text. I've actually had opponents pull this off twice. I really don't think you should try to. It's not that great if you pull it off, and it's really bad if you don't pull it off. This is just not a good rate for an equipment. On to rares. All right. Catilda is absurd. I'm a little surprised it's not mythic. It's obviously way, way, way better if you have a lot of other disturbed spirits so that it's big. But even if it's not big, it has a lot of keywords, and then particularly when it dies, putting those keywords on anything is very scary. You should very, very, very strongly try to draft to maximize this if you get it. But again, even if you can't, it's still fine basically just by itself. Really, really amazing card. Speaking of really amazing cards, Wedding Announcement is obnoxious. It gives you so much value before giving you an Anthem. And an Anthem is amazing and limited. I think the last time I played this, I traded for two of my opponent's cards with just like the tokens, and then after that, I like had a Glorious Anthem that probably won me the game. Playing against this is like if you draw it late, you would often rather draw Glorious Anthem. On turn 3, this feels super impressive no matter what's happening, basically. I guess, yeah, that's pretty clearly communicated with its opening hand win rate of 70% compared to its like games drawn win rate of 61%. Way, 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 way better early than late, but also still busted late. This card is really, really strong. My current draft deck that I'm in the middle of playing matches with is playing this card with no plans, um, despite the fact that I know that it's much better early than late. Welcoming Vampire. This is a really good card that at least feels like a normal rare. Like, this is, you know, better. I mean, well, I guess it's not. I mean, it's for the most part better than Mentor of the Meek. Like Mentor of the Meek has dreams of triggering a million times, but you have to spend mana on each of those triggers. This you don't have to spend mana, and it's bigger and it flies. This like a 2/3 flyer for 3 would be fine if it just if that was it. Like that just like if you imagine this is a common 2/3 flyer for 3, you would take it reasonably early. You'd be happy playing it, and then you get a really busted text box for free also. So then you first pick it rather than just being happy to play it. By invitation only. This is so much better than the normal sweepers are good and limited because this is a sweeper that's good when you're ahead. Provided the way that you're ahead is you have more creatures than your opponent, but some of those creatures are small, which is precisely where you would expect to be in white. And so the fact that like you don't have to not play your stuff, you can just play all your stuff. Your opponent plays their stuff, and now if you have like 5 creatures, some of them are random garbage 1/1 flying tokens and stuff, and like 2 of them are good, you play this, you both sack 3 creatures, you kill your opponent. Also, you don't do that. You just like do nothing. Your opponent plays some stuff. Then you kill all their stuff and lose nothing. This is like a have your cake and eat it too, like good in every situation wrath. Which after saying all of that, I am shocked by how low its game and hand win rate is. I've had great experiences with it. I don't understand what people are doing wrong with this. It's obviously not bad. I don't understand why it doesn't win more than it does. I intend to continue drafting it highly and prioritizing it. I think it's great. Hopeful Initiate. So this card does not seem to me to be in the same ballpark as by invitation only, yet somehow it is 0.1% behind by invitation only. I have no realistic explanation for that. This is a 1/2 training, which we've seen at common. The common you have to spend an extra mana for. The rare, instead of needing to spend an extra mana, you get an extra ability. So probably quite a bit better than the common. Though, yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, it's this plays just radically better than the common because you can play this, then play a 2 mana 2/2, then attack with both, and this becomes a 2/3, and then it's more likely to be able to keep growing from there. Like being able to get the training guy down without kind of like taking the spot off your curve where you would play a creature that can train it is obviously much stronger. This is a solid, this is a solid aggressive creature, nothing amazing. Voice of the Blast. I guess I'm a little bit surprised by this thing's game and hand win rate not being higher. I suspect that that is because it is good enough to play when you're not using it very well. And so people who are just like, yeah, sure, I'm a white deck, I'll play this, drag down its numbers in the decks where it's best. Um, and Yeah, I suspect that if you are at all good at using this thing, it's an actual bomb. Um, not too much more to say about than that. Thalia, uh, I would expect this. No, so I was gonna say I would expect this to be a little bit better than it is, but then I saw that its average taken at is 1.9, and this is a like youthful knight. It's a 2-1 first strike for 2. It's not good. It's a fine playable, and people are taking it as if it's good, and then like using an expensive pick on it, and uh, maybe like drafting white when they shouldn't have because of it and stuff like that. This is like a low tier fine common. Um, Sigarda's summons. This is a huge trap. Any way that you attempt to use the more you try to use this, the more of a trap it is. Like you should just pass it. If you draft it, you might end up taking some things to try to enable it. Then you'll either kind of get there and play it, and then sometimes you'll draw it and it won't work and you'll be unhappy about it. Or you'll really get there, but then your deck is probably horrible. Um, and we can see like this is a card where like its game played win rate is the lowest, and then it's like worse when you draw it. But I think this is doing a lot to sabotage your deck before you ever draw or don't draw it. Um, just stay away. And then mythics. Faithbound Judge. This thing is absurd. It is just like a giant wall that stops being a wall and kills your opponent, and has a bunch of other text that I am not gonna get into because none of it matters. It's just like a random bomb. Good in every white deck, just a bomb. Cemetery Protector. Um, Again, surprised by the low win rate here. Like, I don't really know how 3/4 flash uh, with like any other words on it wouldn't be a little bit better than this. I don't know if this is again just like people are using a high pick, getting too attached, drafting white when it's contested, something like that. Um, this like there's nothing about this that isn't a good card. You can ambush an attacker, and then the like if you ever start like actually making 1/1s with this, that's sweet. Um, I would say, like take this game in hand win rate as like a little bit of a warning not to um, you know, get too invested or anything, but you should certainly be, this is obviously better than like most commons and stuff, and it seems like a card you should put in your deck. Um, Savior of Owenbach, again, like, so this one, so obviously, training has problems. This thing is like fragile, kind of hard to attack with. I had this once. I played it in a deck that was pretty bad for it. Like I had basically no creatures with more than 2 power, so it was very hard to like ever exile 2 things with it, and it was still good for me. Maybe I got lucky and that my opponents just like didn't have answers to it and stuff. This is another one where like there's no way this card is like not quite good. Again, I think this is just like be careful about overcommitting to white based on like a double white mythic that you get early or something. And then Holiday Haunting. this seems really hard to do. If you're in the right spot and you see this at a time that is like reasonable to spend a pick on it, the stats indicate that you can like take and play it and it'll be fine. But I don't think that you should like speculatively draft this first pick unless the pack is really bad, or speculatively draft it early. This is one that I think needs to kind of just like fall in your lap to reward you for like already being in the right place. And that is the end of white. For anyone watching this later, I am breaking this up into different videos that'll be released throughout the week, next week from when I'm recording this. So tune in, go to my next video or come back tomorrow or whatever's appropriate for the time that you're watching this. We'll be talking about blue. Yeah.